really trying to say to you is this, is that your new messianic person that you have met, and a new messianic person doesn't automatically mean that you're Jewish. And when you go and do these things of the faith, it doesn't mean that you're becoming Jewish. It means that you're messianic. It means that you're following after the Messiah from a Hebrew definition that originates with our father Abraham. The Apostle Paul says, not all those of Israel are Israel. He goes on to say that there's even further definitions of the people that belong to God. And he refers to those that are the true descendants are those which are the children of promise. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about Abraham specifically. He also says, Paul says, that by being a believer in the Messiah, that you are of the seed of Abraham. And that's a very powerful teaching, the Apostle Paul, trying to draw you back to the original definition of what God established with our father Abraham. Now, Abraham was given a whole series of promises from God. God established a new relationship with man through Abraham, calling Abraham the friend of God. And it's on the basis of those promises that we get the definition for faith and what follows that's taught to us in the Scripture. But, if you go up to the average person and you say, well, what exactly did God promise to Abraham? Sometimes people are perplexed and are not sure about exactly what that is. I want to take you to a passage of Scripture, Genesis 12, beginning at verse 1 through verse 3, where God promises and begins the discussion to promise things to our father Abraham. That Scripture says, Now the Lord said to Abram, Go forth from your country, and from your relatives, and from your father's house, to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you, and make your name great, so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. God promised to Abram, at that time that was his name, that he was going to take him to a land and give him a land. That's where we get the first indication God promised a land. The promised land becomes the focus of the story, particularly of the children of Israel. The exodus from Egypt will be to take the children of Israel back to the promised land. The promised land is also a metaphor of the messianic kingdom, the future world to come. And so this original promise with Abraham actually reaches all the way into our future about a great promised place that we can live that God has appointed for us. He also promised him that he was going to bless him and increase him, that he was going to make him the father of many people. Abram means the father of many. Abraham, the name change that God gave to him later on in Genesis 17, actually means the father of many nations. And so this was the promise that God was going to cause him to increase. Well, to do that, that means that he is intending to grant him children. Part of the story of Abraham is about that he was an older man and was unable to have children with his wife. But as you will find out in the story, God caused that to happen so that he would fulfill the promise of many descendants. In Genesis chapter 15, at verse 1, there's another promise that is given to Abraham. And it says, After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, Do not fear, Abram. I am a shield to you, and your reward shall be very great. The promise here was that God was going to defend him and protect him from his enemies, and also that he would cause his reward, the blessing, the inheritance that he has, that he can pass to his children, would be exceedingly great. This is part of the opening statement that I made to you about the Father and the Son. The Father has great wealth and has a great inheritance to share. And here God promised this great reward to Abraham that would be shared with his descendants. Following in that same chapter, if you go to verses 5 and 6, it says, And he took him, Abraham, outside and said, Now look toward the heavens and count the stars if you're able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. He had been promised that he would have many descendants, and to carry that out, God had him actually look up into the heavens and to count the stars. Astronomers will tell you that if you look into a clear night sky, don't have the city lights around you and so forth, your natural eye will see something approximately 600,000 stars. Interestingly enough, later on, when the children of Israel will leave Egypt, they will count up the men of war, and it will be over 600,000 men that would be a part of it. Thus, God was fulfilling his promise that he had given to Abraham. And even when they took the census after that generation had been judged in the wilderness, there were still over 600,000 men for it. God was still fulfilling his promise to our father Abraham. But as you know, there's way more stars than what your eyes can see. And God's promise was really about the stars of the heaven. It wasn't just the stars that you could see. But it illustrates to us the way God's promises were beginning to work. He would promise to Abraham and fulfill it for Abraham, and is continuing to fulfill those promises for Abraham. At the time that he was given this promise, Abram didn't have any children. Isaac wasn't around, Ishmael wasn't around at all. And so the idea of having children was going to be a great miracle. God was going to have to do a great thing for Abram to see this be fulfilled for him. And because Abram believed the promise, because although he didn't have the physical elements in front of him, because he believed what God had said to him and promised to him, this was counted for righteousness. And thus begins a very powerful teaching, a very profound thing about what is the heritage of Abraham. What is this thing that God has given to him that we get to be the benefit of? And it begins with that statement, faith is counted for righteousness. Now I'm going to give you a summarized version very quickly of what truly Abraham really teaches us. And I'll go back and show you the points in his story and life that illustrate this. But let me just summarize it for you quickly. Faith is counted for righteousness. Righteousness has kissed justice. Justice demands sacrifice. And with sacrifice, you receive salvation. That's the actual teaching that is illustrated for us in the life of Abraham. Now, before we go further, like we define the word Hebrew, let's define each of these words that I just used. For example, faith. What is faith? Faith is believing in the promises of God. If you go anywhere in the Scripture where the word faith, including the New Testament, where the word faith is at, you can substitute the phrase believing in the promises of God, and that Scripture will be correct every time. That's what faith means. And that's the reason why that we call Abraham the father of our faith. He believed the promises of God, and it was counted for righteousness. So what is righteousness? Righteousness is doing the right thing. If you take that phrase, doing the right thing, and you substitute it any time in Scripture, Psalms, Proverbs, wherever you find the term righteousness, you will discover that's the definition that fits everywhere in Scripture. Righteousness has kissed justice. You can't separate righteousness from justice in the Scripture. So what is justice? Justice is doing the right thing, but balancing it with loving kindness, mercy, and truth. And when you balance doing the right thing with mercy and truth, that's justice. You can't separate justice from righteousness, and you can't separate righteousness from justice. They're both intimate friends, as the Scripture refers to. In fact, God's throne, it says that the foundation of his throne is based on righteousness and justice together. They both work together. So then what is sacrifice? If justice demands sacrifice, what is sacrifice? Sacrifice is the payment that is made, or the substitution